The flicker of torchlight dances across rough stone walls as whispers echo in a forgotten cave. You're not just observing history, you're standing where it unfolded, where our ancestors first reached beyond survival to grasp something greater. These weren't just gatherings, they were the birthplaces of human culture itself. Think about it, every civilization that ever rose began with moments like these, when small groups of early humans created meaning through secret rites. What drove them to develop such elaborate ceremonies? How did these rituals shape everything from social structures to agriculture? We're about to follow the trail of ancient smoke through time, uncovering how initiation rites bound communities together, how sacred dances predicted the seasons, and why certain symbols appeared simultaneously across continents. The answers might surprise you because these ceremonies didn't just reflect early societies. They actively built them. Let's begin where it all started, in those smoke-filled chambers where humanity first discovered the power of shared belief. Deep in the shadows of prehistory, before written language or cities, our ancestors faced a world far more unpredictable than ours. Violent storms, sudden deaths, the mysterious cycle of seasons, all demanded explanation. And here, in that primal need to make sense of the unknown, the first ceremonies were born. Picture a group of early humans gathered around a fire, chanting in unison, their voices rising against the darkness. This wasn't mere entertainment, it was survival. Rituals became the earliest form of control, a way to impose order on nature's chaos. When crops failed or predators struck, ceremonies gave people a way to respond, to act rather than just endure. Anthropologists point to something deeper too. These rituals weren't just about fear, they forged unbreakable bonds, dancing together, chanting together, even mourning together. These shared experiences turned scattered individuals into communities. The 40,000-year-old Lion Man figurine, carved from mammoth ivory, tells us something profound. Found in a German cave, this half-human, half-beast statue likely played a role in shamanic rites, perhaps as a bridge between hunters and the spirits of their prey. But here's the fascinating part. These ceremonies weren't just for the moment. They laid the foundation for everything that followed. Burial rituals show early humans grappling with death, planting the seeds of afterlife beliefs. Seasonal ceremonies became the first calendars, tracking time by the moon and stars, and the most powerful realization. These weren't random acts, they were the beginnings of culture itself, shaping how early societies organized, governed, and even fought wars. So the next time you see a modern celebration, a wedding, a holiday, even a sports chant, remember, you're witnessing the echoes of something ancient, something that once held the very fabric of human survival together. Now imagine standing at the edge of a dense forest as a teenager, knowing you won't return until you've proven yourself worthy. This wasn't just a trial, it was a transformation. Across cultures, initiation rites acted as society's way of shaping raw potential into purposeful adulthood, often pushing initiates to their limits. Take the Aboriginal walkabout, for example. Far more than a solitary journey, it was a carefully designed education. For months, young individuals would traverse their ancestral lands alone, learning to read nature's subtle signs, tracking animals, finding water, and connecting with the spiritual stories embedded in the landscape. Survival wasn't just physical, it was about becoming part of something larger than oneself. Meanwhile, on the savannas of East Africa, Maasai boys as young as 12 faced their own defining moment. The Unoto ceremony, a test of endurance and pain, required them to stand motionless as elders performed ritual scarification. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. Every mark symbolized responsibility, binding them to their roles as protectors of the community. But why the secrecy? Why the pain? Anthropologists point to a striking psychological truth. Rituals that are emotionally intense or physically demanding create indelible memories. The scar left by a blade wasn't just a wound, it was a living reminder of duty. The visions sought in isolation weren't just dreams, they were lessons etched into the mind. And here's the remarkable part, these ceremonies weren't just personal trials. They were society's way of ensuring continuity. A Maasai warrior didn't just learn to wield a spear, he learned the weight of leadership. An Aboriginal youth didn't just memorize paths, they inherited the stories that gave those paths meaning. What emerges is a pattern. Initiation rites weren't about breaking the young, they were about building them into the people their communities needed. The pain, the secrecy, the challenges, each element was a deliberate tool, sharpening individuals to carry forward traditions that might otherwise fade. Beneath the towering pyramids and within the sacred groves of Europe, a select few held the keys to humanity's greatest mysteries. These weren't just learned individuals, they were gatekeepers of knowledge so potent it shaped entire civilizations. In ancient Egypt, the priesthood didn't merely perform rituals, they controlled the very rhythm of life along the Nile. Their ceremonies weren't theater. They were precise, calculated acts tied to the annual flooding, ensuring crops flourished and order prevailed. To question their authority wasn't just heresy, it risked destabilizing the entire society built around their predictions. The Druids of Celtic lands operated similarly, their rituals woven into the fabric of the natural world. They didn't just observe solstices, they orchestrated them, using celestial alignments to dictate planting, harvests, and even the timing of wars. This wasn't mere superstition. It was early science disguised as ceremony, a way to harness the environment through collective belief. And then there were the Eleusinian Mysteries, perhaps the most enigmatic of all. For over 1,000 years, initiates ranging from philosophers like Plato to everyday Athenians underwent secret rites promising spiritual enlightenment. The details remain lost to history, but the power of exclusion is undeniable. Those who participated swore oaths of silence, creating an unspoken hierarchy between the enlightened and the uninitiated. Here's what ties these societies together. Their rituals were never just about tradition. They were tools of influence, blending spectacle with secrecy to command reverence. Symbols like the ankh in Egypt or the mistletoe in Druidic rites weren't just decorations. They were visual shortcuts to deeper truths, reinforcing the idea that only a chosen few could interpret them. And the most potent ingredient, fear. Not crude intimidation, but the quiet dread of being excluded from vital knowledge. When the Druids spoke of curses or the Egyptian priests warned of divine anger, they weren't just making threats, they were preserving their authority by making society need them. Fast forward to today, and you'll spot echoes of this dynamic in modern fraternities, exclusive clubs, and even certain professional circles. The symbols change, but the human impulse remains, to create belonging through exclusivity and to wield ceremony as a form of quiet control. Which brings us to the next layer of this story, how these same rituals didn't just manipulate people, but seemingly bent nature itself to human will. Long before telescopes or written records, our ancestors turned their gaze upward, not in idle wonder, but with razor-sharp purpose. The stones of Nabta Playa, arranged in the Egyptian desert over 7,000 years ago, tell a silent story. This wasn't just a circle of rocks, it was a sophisticated celestial calendar, marking the summer solstice with eerie precision to signal the arrival of life-giving monsoon rains. Halfway across the world, the Maya crafted Chichen Itza's El Castillo pyramid as a cosmic mirror. During equinoxes, sunlight slithers down the staircase like a serpent, a divine reminder that planting season had arrived. Even today, modern scientists marvel at how these structures functioned with near-scientific accuracy despite lacking formal mathematics. But perhaps the most striking example comes from the American Southwest. The Hopi snake dance wasn't just performance, it was meteorology in motion. By timing their ceremonies to the moon's phases, elders could predict summer rains within days. When dancers released snakes, symbols of lightning, into the desert, they weren't begging the gods. They were activating a system of ecological knowledge honed over generations. Here's what modern archaeology confirms. These rituals were humanity's first laboratories. The shaman who tracked Venus's cycles or the druid who charted solstice shadows. They weren't so different from modern scientists. Both observed patterns, tested hypotheses, and encoded results in ritual to ensure survival. The difference, where we use satellites and algorithms, they used stones and dances. Yet as societies grew more complex, so did the stakes of this celestial knowledge. Controlling the calendar meant controlling food supplies, trade routes, even political power. And when exclusive priestly classes began guarding these secrets, the line between sacred ceremony and social control blurred into shadow, which raises a haunting question: what happens when the keepers of light become the architects of darkness? The answer lies deep underground, in chambers where firelight flickered not for celebration but for initiation into secrets that could unmake kings. The torchlight dims as we descend into the darkest corners of ancient belief, where reverence and violence intertwined in ways that still unsettle us today. Blood wasn't merely spilled in these rites, it flowed as sacred currency, a terrifying yet logical extension of early humanity's bargain with the unseen world. Take the Aztec Templo Maya, where priests wielded obsidian blades with chilling precision. Victims weren't chosen at random, they were often warriors, their blood seen as the ultimate offering to Huitzilopochtli, the sun god. This wasn't mindless brutality, it was cosmology in action. The Aztecs believed the sun required tonally life force to rise each day. No blood meant no dawn, no crops, no future. Archaeological evidence from Tenochtitlan reveals altars stained with layers of hemoglobin, each sacrifice meticulously timed to celestial events. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Viking blots turned snow crimson. At Uppsala, Sweden, every 9 years, a sacred grove hosted sacrifices so vast that Adam of Bremen, a medieval chronicler, described hanging bodies from the trees like grisly fruit. But recent isotope analysis on bones found at these sites tells a subtler story. Many victims weren't slaves or prisoners, but volunteers, high-status individuals seeking to secure their families' favor with the gods. Even rituals that didn't end in death wielded pain as a tool. Mayan nobles drew thorn-studded ropes through their tongues, collecting blood on bark paper to burn as incense. Cave paintings at Naj Tunis show these acts weren't just painful, they were ecstatic, with participants entering trance states to commune with ancestors. Why such extremes? Anthropology offers a piercing insight. Societies that depended on unreliable harvests or battles saw life as a balance sheet. Blood settled the debt. A sacrificed prisoner of war repaid the gods for victory. A king's voluntary bloodletting purchased fertility for his people, and beneath it all lay an unspoken truth. These acts bound communities together through shared awe, horror, and relief that someone else had been chosen. Yet for all their ferocity, these ceremonies followed strict protocols. Aztec priests used specific knife angles to minimize suffering. Norse blots required ritual silence before the killing blow. This wasn't chaos, it was controlled catharsis, violence harnessed to stave off greater calamity. What's most striking is how these societies drew lines even in blood. The Inca Quihapac Hutcha sacrificed children, but only the unblemished, considered pure enough to carry messages to the gods. The very brutality that repels us today was, in its context, an act of terrible reverence. And here's the paradox: from this darkness emerged light. The same cultures that practiced blood rites also pioneered herbal medicine, astronomy, and poetry. Which forces us to ask, were these acts truly barbaric, or were they the price humanity paid to cross the bridge between terror and transcendence? The rhythmic pounding of hide drums echoes through the jungle as a healer's chant rises above the feverish patient. This wasn't primitive guesswork, it was precision medicine millennia before the first clinics. From the Kalahari to the Amazon, healing ceremonies formed humanity's earliest healthcare systems, blending the physical and spiritual in ways modern science is only beginning to decode. Take the Kung people's all-night healing dances where the entire community moved as one. Their feet stamped the earth in unison, hands clapping in hypnotic rhythm as healers laid hands on the sick. Anthropologists studying these rituals made a startling discovery. The vibrations and communal energy didn't just comfort patients, they triggered measurable endorphin releases, reducing pain as effectively as some pharmaceuticals. The Kung called it pulling out sickness, but what they were really activating was the body's own ability to heal itself. Then there's the Amazonian ayahuasca brew, often dismissed as mere hallucinogen. Indigenous shamans knew better. Their ceremonies blended the vine's purgative effects with Ikaro's sacred songs that guided participants through visionary journeys. Contemporary brain scans reveal why this worked. The plant's DMT interacted with serotonin receptors while the ritual's structure provided psychological safety, allowing deep emotional release. It wasn't just about chemistry, it was chemistry orchestrated by tradition. Even Hippocrates, the father of Western medicine, would recognize this approach. His famous healing temples in ancient Greece used dream incubation. Patients slept in sacred chambers where priests interpreted their visions to diagnose illness. The treatment, ritual baths, drama performances, and carefully staged encounters with snakes, all designed to provoke the mind's self-healing capacities. Modern hospitals are now catching up. Music therapy eases post-surgery pain precisely because rhythmic sound waves affect the same brain regions once targeted by shamanic drums. Guided visualization techniques mirror the narrative healing of ancient storytelling ceremonies. The difference, where we use MRI machines, our ancestors used masks and firelight. But both approaches tap into the same truth. Healing flourishes where belief and biology intersect. These ceremonies did more than treat individuals, they sustained entire communities. When a Kung healer danced, the whole village participated, reinforcing social bonds that themselves became medicine against isolation's ills. An ayahuasca shaman's songs weren't solitary performances but collective journeys, with each voice weaving safety into the brew's challenging visions. What emerges is a portrait of ancient healers as the original holistic practitioners, masters of psychology, neuroscience, and community care wrapped in ritual. Their drumbeats still echo in today's sound baths, their plant wisdom informs modern pharmacology, and their understanding of the mind-body connection now fills peer-reviewed journals. Perhaps the greatest testament to their legacy, science is finally speaking their language. Beneath the cloak of night, elders once gathered their people not to lecture, but to breathe history into the present. In a world without writing, ceremonies became living archives, every chant a chapter, every dance a map, every ritual gesture a line of code preserving survival itself. The griots of Mali didn't merely sing of kings and battles. Their performances at weddings and coronations were operating systems for society, embedding legal precedents, genealogies, and moral codes into melodies that even children could memorize. Half a world away, Aboriginal elders performed dreamtime stories with exacting precision, their bodies tracing contours of the land as they sang. What seemed like theater was actually geospatial engineering. Every step marked water sources, every rhythm echoed animal migrations. Researchers mapping these ceremonies found astonishing accuracy. The dances aligned with star patterns and seasonal shifts, turning oral tradition into a practical survival guide. Even the slightest deviation carried consequences. In Hawaii, kahuna priests knew that misplacing a single syllable in a creation chant could disrupt the ceremony's spiritual power. This wasn't superstition, it was quality control. The rhythmic structure of these chants, studied by modern linguists, proves they were engineered for flawless transmission. Like DNA, their repetitive patterns resisted mutation across generations. Yet these traditions did more than record facts, they shaped perception. The Norse skalds didn't just recount Viking raids, their alliterative verses performed at feasts framed bravery as inevitable and cowardice as unthinkable. Listeners didn't hear sagas, they absorbed social contracts. Modern psychology confirms what oral cultures knew instinctively. Information wrapped in emotion and rhythm lodges deeper in memory. Trace the thread further, and you'll find these ancient techniques alive in today's storytelling. The call and response of hip-hop lyrics mirrors griot teaching methods. Blockbuster films still structure hero journeys like Polynesian navigation chants. Both are maps disguised as entertainment. Even the viral rhythms of TikTok dances owe a debt to those Aboriginal elders, proving that humanity's oldest technology isn't found in tools, but in the irresistible urge to turn knowledge into performance. And nowhere was this performance more consequential than in ceremonies that defined what it meant to be a man or woman. From the secluded huts of Amazonian coming-of-age rites to the warrior initiations of Sparta, rituals didn't just reflect gender roles, they constructed them stitch by symbolic stitch. Imagine a festival where only women could gather, no men allowed under penalty of death. This wasn't some ancient rebellion, but the Thesmophoria, a Greek ceremony honoring Demeter, goddess of the harvest. For 3 days, married women retreated to secluded sanctuaries, reenacting myths of loss and renewal while handling sacred objects linked to fertility. Meanwhile, across the globe in the sweat lodges of the Lakota, men sat in steaming darkness, their prayers rising with the scent of sage, a space where women rarely entered. These weren't arbitrary exclusions, they reflected something deeper, a belief that certain powers flowed only through specific genders. In Mesopotamia, archaeologists uncovered pottery fragments coated with beer residue in temples dedicated to Ninkasi, the goddess of brewing. The surprise, these vessels were found in areas associated with priestesses, suggesting women held the secret to transforming grain into sacred intoxication. Yet some cultures defied binary divisions entirely. India's Hairas, a millennia-old third gender, weren't just accepted but revered in rituals. They blessed weddings, named newborns, and danced at temples, their presence seen as a conduit of divine luck. Colonial records later scorned them, but ancient texts tell a different story. These were figures who transcended rigid categories, their rituals affirming a truth modern society is still grappling with, that identity and spirituality don't always fit neatly into boxes. Why such stark divides, or lack thereof? Anthropology suggests it often came down to control. When Greek men barred women from politics, they granted them authority in fertility rites, channeling female energy into safe, sacred roles. Conversely, Hera's ritual roles may have flourished because they occupied a space outside conventional power structures, free to mediate between worlds. The artifacts left behind tell a nuanced tale. A Minoan snake goddess figurine clutches serpents, symbols of rebirth, perhaps hinting at priestesses who wielded real influence. A Viking burial in Birka, long assumed to be a warrior's grave, was revealed by DNA analysis to hold a woman's bones alongside swords, challenging assumptions about who could access the glory of Valhalla. What emerges isn't a simple story of oppression or equality, but of societies using ritual to negotiate the tension between biology and belief. Some ceremonies locked genders into roles, others became rare spaces where those roles could bend or shatter entirely. And when those same societies turned their gaze toward conflict, ritual didn't disappear. It sharpened into something far deadlier. The air thickens with the scent of crushed herbs and sweat as warriors lock eyes across a battlefield. But before the first spear flies, something extraordinary happens. A haka erupts, feet stamping the earth with such force that dust rises like ancestral spirits answering the call. This wasn't just intimidation, it was alchemy turning raw violence into something sacred. From the Maori to the Mongol steppes, combat wasn't merely a clash of weapons, it was a carefully choreographed drama. Samurai didn't just sharpen their swords before battle, they engaged in chanoyu, the tea ceremony, steeping each movement in deliberate calm. Archaeologists studying their writings found a striking pattern. Those who practiced this ritual showed markedly clearer decision-making in the chaos of combat. The tea wasn't a beverage, it was a mental whetstone. Meanwhile, on the African savannah, Zulu warriors performed the Ukakwaba ritual after battle, washing blood from their spears in sacred rivers. But this wasn't just hygiene. Oral histories reveal a deeper purpose. The act cleansed the warriors themselves, separating the brutality of war from the peace of homecoming. Even the weapons were treated as living entities, their thirst for blood ritually quenched to prevent unchecked violence. The Greeks took this further. Before the Trojan War, Agamemnon sacrificed his own daughter to Artemis not out of cruelty, but because the ritual demanded it. His fleet wouldn't sail without divine favor, and the gods required blood as collateral. Modern excavations at Orleans reveal altars stained with iron residue, stark reminders that ancient commanders saw themselves as middlemen between mortals and the cosmos. What unites these traditions? A profound psychological truth. Ritual creates emotional distance. By framing violence as ceremonial, whether through choreographed dances, purification rites, or sacrifices, warriors could compartmentalize the unthinkable. The Maori haka channeled rage into rhythm. The Zulu spear washing marked a clear end point to killing. Even the samurai's tea ceremony served as a mental airlock between the serenity of home and the savagery of battle. Yet ceremonies didn't just sanctify war, they sought to prevent it. The Iroquois Confederacy's Great Law of Peace used elaborate wampum belt exchanges to negotiate treaties, with every bead symbolizing a sacred promise. Break the agreement, and you didn't just anger humans, you risked cosmic imbalance. Perhaps that's the greatest paradox of these rituals. The same practices that made war bearable also held the seeds of its resolution. Because when violence becomes ceremonial, it also becomes optional, a choice bound by rules rather than chaos. And in that space between ritual and restraint, humanity found its first fragile steps toward peace. The carved wooden pipe passes from hand to hand, its smoke curling upward like a silent witness. For the Lakota, this wasn't just a ritual, it was law. The sacred chanonpa, or peace pipe, transformed negotiations into binding covenants, its bowl carved from earth and stem from sky, uniting participants under the same moral axis. To speak falsely after smoking it wasn't just dishonest, it risked supernatural retribution. Archaeology confirms the pipe's power. Excavations at treaty sites revealed deliberate placements of pipe fragments, as if the very clay held memory of the promises made. Half a world away, the moot ceremonies of West Africa turned conflict resolution into communal theater. Elders didn't merely listen, they orchestrated. Disputants would reenact their grievances through storytelling, each detail scrutinized by the crowd. Then came the climax. Both parties drank water mixed with dust from the village shrine, binding them to truth under the ancestors' gaze. Anthropologists note a brilliant psychological tactic here. By externalizing the dispute as performance, the moot drained hostility of its intimacy, making reconciliation a collective project rather than a private feud. The ancient Greeks took a different approach. Every 4 years, heralds proclaimed the Olympic truce, a sacred armistice that halted wars across fractious city-states. Competitors traveled safely through enemy territories, their immunity guaranteed not by soldiers but by shared reverence for Zeus. Recent analysis of bronze inscriptions reveals the truce's enforcement mechanism. Violators faced exclusion from future games and more devastating loss of prestige in the eyes of the gods. What united these rituals? 3 brilliant design features. First, they shifted the stakes beyond the immediate dispute, tying honesty to cosmic consequences. Second, they made reconciliation visible, whether through shared smoke, ritual drinking, or athletic competition. And third, they leveraged communal pressure. No one wanted to be the liar who broke the pipe's magic or the warmonger who defiled the gods' playground. Modern diplomacy still echoes these ancient innovations. Handshakes derive from showing empty weapon hands. Signing ceremonies mimic the solemnity of oath-taking. Even the United Nations Assembly Hall, with its circular seating, unconsciously mirrors the moot's inclusive design. The tools have changed, but the human need for ritualized trust remains. So the next time you see leaders shaking hands after a tense negotiation, look closer. You're witnessing the ghost of something far older, a time when peace wasn't just negotiated but performed into existence. The wooden mask stares back with hollow eyes until the drums quicken and suddenly it's alive. For the Inuit carver who shaped it from a single piece of driftwood, this wasn't craftsmanship, it was careful engineering of the supernatural. Transformation masks with their layered faces that split open during ceremonies didn't just depict spirits, they became vessels for them. When a dancer's pull of a string revealed the inner face, the community wasn't watching a performance. They were witnessing a literal metamorphosis where human and spirit realms briefly overlapped. Now shift your gaze to the twisted gold torques around Celtic chieftains' necks. Far more than jewelry, these rigid collars were wearable contracts with the divine. Archaeologists note their designs, some mimicking coiled serpents, others etched with solar symbols, always matched the gods they honored. A torque found in Francis Vic's burial weighed nearly a pound of pure gold, its terminals shaped like lion paws. Why such extravagance? Because the metal's resistance to tarnish mirrored the eternal favor these leaders sought from the gods. Wear it in life and it proclaimed your status, bury it in death and it became your passport to the other world. Across the African savanna, the Luba people's Lukasa memory boards tell a different story. To the uninitiated, they're just wood studded with beads and shells, but run a trained elder's fingers over those patterns and entire dynasties unfold. Each indentation marks a king's reign. Every colored bead signifies a treaty or battle. These weren't decorative, they were interactive databases, their knowledge deliberately encrypted. Without the proper ritual training, the board remained mute. What threads these objects together? 3 deliberate choices. First, their materials: driftwood that survived sea journeys, gold that defied decay, wood that outlasted flesh, were selected for their endurance, anchoring fleeting rituals to something permanent. Second, their forms followed sacred geometry. Inuit masks often mirrored animal skull structures, while Celtic torques replicated the sun's path. And third, they demanded participation. Masks needed dancers, torques required wearers, memory boards depended on storytellers. The brilliance lies in their duality. A mask hanging inert on a wall was just art, but animated by ceremony, it became a switchblade between worlds. A torque in a merchant's chest was mere wealth. But around a druid's neck, it transformed into a lightning rod for power. These objects remind us that early societies didn't just believe in the supernatural, they built tools to manipulate it. And speaking of manipulation, nothing compares to how our ancestors weaponized rhythm and movement to alter minds en masse. A single drumbeat shatters the silence, then another and another, until the rhythm becomes a living creature moving through the crowd. In Haitian Vodou ceremonies, this wasn't just music. It was a collective heartbeat, syncing bodies and minds into one pulsing organism. Devotees didn't merely dance, they surrendered to the beat, their movements dissolving individual boundaries as spirits took hold. Modern neuroscience reveals the genius behind this ancient technique. The steady, relentless rhythm actually alters brainwave patterns, steering participants into trance states where the impossible feels tangible. Turn now to the Sufi mystics of Turkey, their white robes billowing like celestial bodies as they spun in precise circles. This wasn't performance art, it was physics in motion. Each whirl mirrored the rotation of planets, the dancer's outstretched arm channeling cosmic energy downward into the earth. Rumi, the tradition's most famous practitioner, didn't write poetry about ecstasy. He danced it into existence, proving that sometimes the body understands divinity faster than the mind. Then there's the haunting hum of the Aboriginal didgeridoo, its vibrations resonating not just in the air but in the bones of those who heard it. Elders spoke of the instrument as a bridge, its drone calling ancestors back into the present. Recent acoustic studies found something startling. The didgeridoo's frequencies align with natural earth resonances, creating standing waves that can induce meditative states. What ancient cultures attributed to spirits, we now recognize as bioacoustic sound literally shaping consciousness, the thread tying these traditions together. Participation. Unlike modern concerts where audiences passively listen, these rituals demanded total immersion. The Vodou drummer wasn't separate from the dancer. Each strike of the high drum fed the other's movement. The Sufi whirl wasn't observed, it was joined, even by novices stumbling through their first rotations. And the didgeridoo player didn't perform for listeners. He guided them into collective vibration where breathing synchronized and individual pulses merged. This primal power of rhythm didn't vanish, it evolved. The call and response of African griots became gospel choirs, then blues, then rock and roll. The Sufi spinning birthed the whirling dervishes of electronic dance music festivals. Even the didgeridoo's drone echoes in the bass drops of modern trance tracks. The tools have changed, but the goal remains to dissolve the self, if only for a moment, into something larger. And when these same rhythms turned their focus to death, they didn't mourn, they defied. From Tibetan singing bowls guiding souls to the Aztec death whistles that mimicked the afterlife screams, sound became the chariot that carried the departed across the threshold. But that's a story for another moment. The scent of natron salt hangs thick in the air as priests chant the very first words of the Book of the Dead, not over a corpse but over a living volunteer. In ancient Egypt, mummification began before death. Wealthy elites would undergo rituals to prepare their ka and ba, the soul's dual aspects, for the perilous journey through the Duat. Every organ removed, every amulet placed, even the placement of the tomb's false door aligned with celestial events. This wasn't morbid obsession, it was cosmic cartography, turning the body itself into a vessel for eternity. Now picture a Viking longship ablaze on a northern fjord, its sails catching fire as the body of a Jarl collapses onto his shield. Archaeological digs from Oslo to the Volga reveal an unsettling pattern. Some burial ships contained not just weapons and treasures, but the skeletons of attendants who drank a final toast laced with henbane. Yet forensic analysis shows many went willingly, their bones free of restraint marks. To the Norse, this wasn't murder. It was an honor guard assignment, ensuring their lord arrived in Valhalla with a retinue worthy of Odin's hall. On the Tibetan plateau, the logic of death took a radically different turn. Here, sky burial masters known as Rogiopas dissected corpses with ritual axes, offering the flesh to Himalayan vultures in a ceremony that could last days. Unlike the Egyptians who sought to defy decay, Tibetan Buddhists embraced it, their chants guiding the deceased through the bardo while the bird's wings carried their essence skyward. Satellite studies of charnel grounds reveal these sites were precisely placed along ancient migratory routes, turning ecology into sacrament. What unified these seemingly disparate traditions? 3 profound insights. First, funerary rites functioned as grief's alchemy, transmuting raw loss into structured narrative, whether through the Egyptians' meticulous spells or the Vikings' fiery send-off. Second, they reinforced social hierarchies. The grandeur of a pharaoh's pyramid or a chieftain's ship burial reminded the living of their place in the order. And third, they answered humanity's oldest anxiety, that death might be an end rather than a threshold. But perhaps the most startling revelation comes from modern psychology. Studies show communities with elaborate death rituals, from New Orleans jazz funerals to Ghana's fantasy coffins, experience lower rates of prolonged grief disorder. The very acts that seem extravagant to outsiders, the chanting, the offerings, the careful staging, prove to be mental lifelines, helping survivors navigate loss through shared action. As the last embers of a Viking ship fade into the sea, we glimpse the dawn of a new revolution, one where humanity's bond with the earth itself would become sacred. The shift from hunting to farming didn't just change what we ate. It transformed how we worshipped, turning seeds into symbols and harvests into holy acts. Beneath the blistering Mesopotamian sun, a king grips a golden sickle, not as a ruler but as a laborer. The first cut of barley at the Akitu festival wasn't just about harvesting grain, it was a sacred transaction. As the blade sliced through stalks, the act tied the monarch's fate to the land's fertility. One misstep in the ritual, one forgotten chant to Enlil, god of storms, and the entire city-state could face drought. Excavated cuneiform tablets reveal meticulous records of these ceremonies, proof that survival hinged on performance as much as rainfall. Meanwhile, across the ocean in the American Southwest, Pueblo farmers watched for the Corn Maiden's dance. These weren't mere performances. The dancers' precise footwork traced ancient patterns believed to channel moisture into the soil. Modern botanists studying traditional Hopi fields made a curious discovery. Crops planted in alignment with these ritual dances showed higher yield. The reason? The ceremonies timed planting to optimal lunar and soil temperature cycles, knowledge encoded in movement long before agricultural science put it into textbooks. The ancient Greeks took a different approach. When priestesses processed through fields with torches during the Thesmophoria, they weren't just honoring Demeter, they were simulating her mythic search for Persephone. Hidden in this drama was agronomic genius. The torch heat and subsequent burial of sacrificial piglets mirrored slash and burn techniques that enriched the soil. Farmers didn't understand nitrogen cycles, but their rituals achieved the same result through symbolic action. What binds these traditions? A shared understanding that food wasn't merely grown, it was negotiated. Offerings to Ceres in Rome, first fruit ceremonies in West Africa, even the Japanese emperor's annual rice planting, all followed the same principle. Nature's cooperation required reciprocity. Archaeology confirms this mindset's impact. Soil analysis at Neolithic sites shows ritual centers were often built on the most fertile land, not as shrines to the divine, but as active participants in ecological balance. Today's harvest festivals still echo these ancient contracts. Thanksgiving's cornucopia mirrors Celtic lammas bread offerings. The Mooncake Festival continues Chinese moon goddess traditions tied to harvest calendars. Even Halloween's pumpkin carving descends from Samhain's protective rituals for stored crops. The tools have changed, tractors replace sickles, weather apps supersede cloud-reading priests, but the human impulse remains, to mark the turning earth with gratitude and awe. And when those same rituals shifted focus from fields to flocks, they unlocked another chapter in humanity's dance with the natural world, one where domestication became a sacred covenant between species. The slightest misstep could unravel an entire society. A mere brush against a sacred object, a single bite of forbidden food, and the wrath of unseen forces would descend. Polynesian tapu systems weren't just rules, they were invisible fences holding chaos at bay. Imagine a world where a fisherman couldn't step on a chief's shadow, where certain fruits were off limits to women, where even the sound of a drum at the wrong hour could invite disaster. These weren't superstitions, they were social DNA, strands of ritual so tightly woven into daily life that breaking them risked more than punishment, it threatened the fabric of community itself. Dive deeper and the logic emerges. Take the Hindu veneration of cows, a taboo so ancient it's etched into the Vedas. On the surface, it might seem mystical, but archaeology reveals a pragmatic core. Cows weren't just animals, they were walking agricultural infrastructure, providing milk, plowing fields, and fertilizing soil. By sacralizing them, early societies ensured their protection long before livestock management became a science. Similarly, Jewish kosher laws, with their meticulous separation of meat and dairy, didn't just encode purity, they prevented foodborne illness in an era before refrigeration. Even the Polynesian tapu on women handling fishing gear served a purpose. It prevented overharvesting by limiting who could exploit the sea. But taboos did more than preserve resources, they shaped identity. In ancient Hawaii, breaking a kapu, the local variant of tapu, often meant death. Yet these very restrictions defined what it meant to be Hawaiian. The foods you avoided, the paths you couldn't walk, the people you couldn't touch, these weren't just rules but markers of belonging. Modern psychology echoes this. Rituals create in-groups and out-groups, a divide as potent today in cultural customs as it was in sacred groves millennia ago. Yet for all their severity, taboos held a curious flexibility. The Maori tapu could be lifted through ceremony. A warrior's spear, once forbidden to touch, became just wood again after the right chance. This wasn't inconsistency, it was precision. Like a spiritual circuit breaker, these rituals allowed societies to toggle between sacred and mundane, ensuring order without suffocating progress. What's striking is how these ancient boundaries still pulse beneath modern life. From dietary restrictions to social etiquette, we may not fear divine retribution for using the wrong fork, but the underlying principle remains. Rituals don't just reflect society's rules, they silently enforce them. And when these taboos traveled carried by traders, migrants, or conquerors, they didn't just spread ideas. They sparked collisions and fusions that reshaped civilizations. The next chapter of this story begins where two ritual worlds meet across the turquoise waters of the Pacific. A shell necklace passes from one weathered hand to another, not as payment but as a promise etched in sacred tradition. The Kula ring of the Trobriand Islands transformed trade into something far greater than material exchange. White solava necklaces traveled clockwise between islands, while red emwali armbands circled counterclockwise, each object carrying the history of every hand it had touched. Anthropologists once dismissed this as primitive barter until they grasped the genius behind it. These ceremonial voyages knitted distant communities into a web of mutual obligation, where the value lay not in the shells themselves, but in the unbreakable bonds they forged. Shift continents to the Silk Road's dusty caravanserais, where merchants from Samarkand to Xi'an knelt on embroidered carpets for Chawan Mushi tea ceremonies. The ritual wasn't about quenching thirst, it was a test of character. The way a trader handled the delicate porcelain, the patience shown in savoring each bitter sip, these were silent contracts, sealed under the watchful eyes of local deities. A single clumsy gesture could collapse deals worth fortunes. Then there's the potlatch, where Pacific Northwest chiefs didn't just exchange goods, they obliterated them. Imagine a leader summoning rivals to a feast, then deliberately burning stacks of blankets or shattering copper plaques worth years of labor. To colonial observers, it seemed like madness. But for tribes like the KWAKWAK, adjective WAKW, this ritualized destruction was strategic diplomacy. By giving away wealth through spectacle, they demonstrated power so absolute that material loss meant nothing. The message, our alliances aren't bought, they're earned through audacity. Why embed trade in ceremony? Because trust is humanity's oldest currency. A handshake pales next to an oath sworn over shared hallucinogenic brew, or a pact sealed with the gift of a living falcon. Rituals raise the stakes, cheat your trading partner, and you didn't just breach a deal, you risked cosmic retribution. Yet when European colonizers arrived, they saw not sacred systems but inefficiency. Missionaries banned potlatches as wasteful. British administrators dismissed the Kula ring as primitive. Tea ceremonies were reduced to exotic curiosities in merchant journals. The result, centuries-old networks of trust unraveled, replaced by cold contracts enforceable only by distant courts. But here's what colonial powers failed to grasp: these ceremonies weren't obstacles to commerce. They were commerce wrapped in stories, sanctified by tradition, and designed to outlast empires. Today's global trade might run on digital signatures, but the human need for ritualized trust remains unchanged. The boardroom handshake, the exchanging of business cards with both hands, these are the ghosts of ancient practices, whispering that even now, the most binding agreements are those sealed by something deeper than ink. And when these ceremonies were stripped away, something unexpected emerged in their absence: new hybrid rituals, born from resistance and resilience. But that's a revelation for another moment. The thunder of drums suddenly fell silent across entire continents, not by chance but by decree. When European colonizers encountered indigenous ceremonies, they didn't just dismiss them as primitive, they systematically outlawed them, recognizing their power to unite and resist. In Canada, the potlatch ban of 1884 criminalized the very act of gathering to give away wealth, fearing its ability to reinforce tribal loyalties. On the American plains, the sun dance, a ceremony of endurance and spiritual rebirth, was driven underground by government agents who saw its piercing rituals as threats to assimilation. Even the pulse of African drums was banned in the Caribbean, their rhythms deemed too dangerous for enslaved communities to communicate through. Yet beneath the surface, something remarkable unfolded. In Cuba, Yoruba deities disguised themselves as Catholic saints. Chango became Santa Barbara, while Our Lady of Mercy shielded Yamao's secrets. What colonizers called Santeria was actually survival strategy, preserving West African spirituality in plain sight, one veil at a time. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, the Maori kept their haka alive by transferring its sacred movements onto rugby fields, letting colonial spectators cheer for what they didn't realize was cultural defiance. Archaeologists have since uncovered subtle evidence of this resistance. Hidden caves in British Columbia reveal potlatch regalia buried to avoid confiscation. Oral histories from Oklahoma describe sun dance leaders conducting ceremonies under moonlight, far from government eyes. Even the blues born from Mississippi Delta plantations echoes the forbidden rhythms of West African drumming, its pentatonic scales carrying old gods into new forms. What makes this resilience so extraordinary? Ceremonies didn't just endure, they adapted. When the Spanish forced Filipinos to convert, the indigenous Anito spirit rituals merged with Catholic processions, creating the vibrant Pahias festival where harvest offerings now adorn saint statues. In Haiti, Vodou became a coded language of rebellion, its dances secretly mapping escape routes for revolutionaries. The lesson is clear: when rituals are banned, they don't vanish, they evolve. A drumbeat suppressed becomes a heartbeat in song. A forbidden dance resurfaces as sport. A sacred chant hides in a hymn. And in that transformation lies humanity's quiet triumph, the refusal to let identity be erased. Today, these once persecuted traditions are reclaiming their power. The sun dance now thrives openly on Lakota lands, the potlatch legally returned to Northwest Coast tribes, and the haka reverberates beyond stadiums into political protest. But their survival begs a deeper question. What modern ceremonies are being born from today's struggles, waiting to be discovered by future generations? A university president places a velvet-trimmed hood over a graduate's shoulders, a gesture that would feel eerily familiar to a medieval monk. Those flowing academic robes didn't originate in lecture halls. They descended directly from the vestments of 12th century clerics, their colors once denoting theological disciplines rather than majors. The mace carried at commencement, a symbolic descendant of the battle clubs medieval scholars wielded to protect themselves on dangerous pilgrimages to early universities. Even the act of moving the tassel from right to left mirrors ancient rites of passage, where initiates shifted ritual garments to mark transformation. Turn to the Olympics and the parallels grow more vivid. That iconic torch relay didn't begin in 1936. It echoes the Lampadiadromia of ancient Greece, where runners carried sacred fire from Delphi to honor Prometheus. The laurel wreaths placed on victors' heads, identical to those awarded at the Pythian Games 2,500 years ago. What modern audiences see as pageantry, anthropologists recognize as living fossils, ceremonial behaviors preserved because they trigger something primal in us. Yet some traditions evolved beyond mere symbolism. The Japanese tea ceremony, or chanoyu, still demands the same precision it did when samurai practiced it to steady their minds before battle. Every whisk of matcha, every deliberate turn of the bowl cultivates what neuroscience now calls flow state, proof that ancient rituals didn't just mark time, they shaped consciousness itself. Similarly, the British monarch's coronation still includes the Stone of Scone, the same sandstone slab Gaelic kings stood upon to be crowned. The weight of history isn't metaphorical here, it's literal. But why do these archaic forms persist in airports and courtrooms rather than museums? Psychologists point to their unique ability to anchor us. When a judge's gavel strikes or a bride tosses her bouquet, they're not just following tradition. They're plugging into what anthropologists call liminality, those threshold moments where rituals ease transitions too profound for words. The military's salute, originally a knight raising his visor to show identity. The handshake, a medieval gesture proving no dagger was hidden up the sleeve. These acts endure because they transform uncertainty into choreography, letting us navigate life's upheavals with borrowed grace. The most fascinating examples, though, are the ones we've forgotten were rituals at all. The act of blowing out birthday candles began as offerings to Artemis, the moon goddess, tapping a champagne bottle before opening, a remnant of sailors christening ships with sacrificial wine. Even something as mundane as a high five traces back to ancient Mesopotamia, where palm touches were believed to transfer spiritual energy, which raises a tantalizing question: what other ceremonies lie dormant in our daily lives, waiting to be rediscovered? The way we queue for concerts mirrors pilgrimages to sacred sites. Office happy hours unconsciously replicate communal mead halls. And the next time you see a protest march, look closer. The chants, the collective movement, even the symbolic colors all follow the same deep patterns that once guided harvest dances and warrior initiations. Perhaps the greatest testament to these rituals isn't their survival, but their invisibility. They've become so woven into our lives that we no longer see their threads, only the comfort of the tapestry they create. And somewhere, right now, new ceremonies are being born from the chaos of modern life, destined to outlive us just as the Olympic flame outlived its gods. A rusted bronze dagger emerges from a melting Alaskan glacier, its handle wrapped in decayed leather, its blade still sharp after 3,000 years. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a sacrifice deliberately placed where no human could retrieve it, meant for gods we've long forgotten. Across the globe, from thawing permafrost to shrinking rainforests, the earth is yielding rituals we never knew existed. In the Amazon, anthropologists recently documented a tribe's singing to the mushrooms ceremony, a psychedelic dialogue with the forest that survived unseen by outsiders for untold generations. Meanwhile, in Siberia's melting tundra, reindeer herders stumble upon wooden idols with hollow eyes, their purpose lost with the last shaman who knew their secrets. Göbekli Tepe shattered one of archaeology's core beliefs, that agriculture preceded complex rituals. This 12,000-year-old temple, with its towering stone pillars carved with leaping foxes and scorpions, proves something radical. Our ancestors built monuments to the divine before they built permanent homes. The implications are staggering. What if spirituality, not survival, drove humanity's first great collaborations? And if we've been wrong about that, what other assumptions might crumble? Every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. In Norway's retreating ice patches, hikers find perfectly preserved feathered arrows not for hunting, but for rituals marking the sun's return. Ocean archaeologists off Crete's coast uncover a Minoan ceremonial site submerged for millennia, its altars still stained with saffron and wine. Even outer space offers clues. Satellite imagery reveals geometric earthworks in Brazil's Amazon, vast ceremonial landscapes hidden under canopy until technology pierced the green veil. The tragedy: for every artifact recovered, countless others vanish. Loggers in Borneo bulldoze ancestor stones before anthropologists can document their carvings. Looters strip Peruvian tombs of textiles that held the chemical ghosts of ceremonial brews. Climate change erases ice mummies before their tattoos. Each one a ritual map can be studied. We're in a race against time, not just to uncover lost ceremonies, but to listen to what they're telling us about resilience, community, and the human need to reach beyond the tangible. Perhaps the most humbling realization is how little we truly know. The Amazon's Yanomami people alone possess over 200 documented ceremonies, from spirit canoe voyages to jaguar tooth initiations, yet this might be a fraction of their original practices. Siberian ket drums, inscribed with cosmic journeys, sit mute in museums because the last keepers of their songs died without heirs. Each loss isn't just cultural amnesia, it's a chapter ripped from humanity's collective story. But there's hope in the patterns we can trace. The recurring motif: serpents in Mesoamerica, spirals in Celtic lands, mandalas in Asia hint at a shared symbolic language. The way burial sites from Sweden to Senegal often face the winter solstice sunrise suggests a universal longing to tether the dead to the cycle of renewal. These threads, however frayed, remind us that our ancestors' ceremonies weren't just local traditions. They were experiments in answering the same existential questions we still grapple with today. And somewhere, right now, a farmer in Ethiopia tends a sacred grove whose rituals have never been written down, or a Pacific elder whispers a chant older than pyramids, proof that the tapestry of human ceremony, though frayed, remains unbroken. The next great discovery might not come from a dig site, but from recognizing that these living traditions hold keys to understanding our deepest past. The flicker of smartphone screens may have replaced torchlight, but the human heart still beats to ancient rhythms. Those caves where our ancestors first gathered under painted bison now find their echo in stadium chants, viral challenges, and even the quiet ritual of morning coffee, each one a thread connecting us to something primal. What began as survival strategies became the scaffolding of civilization itself. Ceremonies didn't just reflect our world, they built it layer by sacred layer. Consider this: every time a bride walks down an aisle or a judge bangs a gavel, they're channeling rituals older than written language, the courtroom's sober decorum descends from tribal circles where elders mediated disputes. The white wedding dress mirrors Roman purity rites. Even the act of blowing out birthday candles carries whispers of Artemis's moonlit altars. These traditions endure not because they're quaint, but because they work turning chaos into order, strangers into kin, and fear into meaning. Yet here's the twist: our modern world is creating new ceremonies faster than we realize. The unboxing video, a secular communion with consumer gods, the silent intensity of a yoga class, a descendant of monastic discipline. The way we collectively hold our breath during rocket launches or World Cup penalty kicks, these are the new rites of passage, unscripted but no less powerful. What does this tell us? That ritual isn't some relic to outgrow. It's the operating system of human connection. From #movements to flash mobs, we're still seeking those moments where individuality dissolves into something larger. The tools change, but the urge remains: to mark time, to bind communities, to touch the intangible. So as you scroll through your feed tonight, ask yourself, where are your rituals? The playlist that gets you through heartbreak, the inside joke with friends that's become law, the way you honor a memory. These aren't just habits. They're the latest chapter in a story that began when the first human placed flowers in a grave and dared to believe death wasn't the end. The ceremonies of tomorrow are taking shape right now, not in temples, but in live streams and protest marches and quiet acts of resilience. And that's the most thrilling mystery of all. The past didn't just give us rituals to preserve. It gave us a blueprint to keep creating them. Now we'd love to hear from you. Which ancient ceremony resonated most, and what modern rituals define your world? Drop your thoughts below, and if you've enjoyed this journey through time's hidden corridors, hit subscribe, because history's secrets, we've only just begun to uncover.